Welcome to the end of day one, Black Hat, Locknote session in Black Hat, Singapore. So the plan is going to be, you're going to listen in on a conversation amongst Black Hat review board members. You're going to hear us talk about what we like, what we've seen, our thoughts about the future. And it's going to be very conversational. So it's almost like you're listening into a bunch of friends have a talk about information security. And before we get started, I want to thank Microsoft, and I want to thank Vandana Javahari for helping support Black Hat, because without the support of not only the community, but also industry, sessions like this wouldn't be possible. So with that, I'd like to introduce Vandana to say a few words before we get started.
Thank you.
Use this microphone.
All right, thank you. By the way, they did offer me some drinks. I just said no for now. Just joking. So welcome everyone, and hopefully you enjoyed Black Hat so far. I must admit, Black Hat US and DEF CON right after that, they're usually my most favorite events to attend. I just recently relocated from San Francisco to Singapore, so this is my first Black Hat Asia, and I'm very excited to be here. So, you know, I know that everybody is talking about pandemic and what we've gone through, but the reality is our security was really challenged because of this pandemic, because of the expansion of the digital state and the acceleration of it due to the pandemic, as well as the evolution of the threats, of course. So, you know, overnight or in a few days, personally, professionally, and of course our beloved cybersecurity industry really got impacted. And our IT and security people, they all of a sudden had to really deal with all of their user, all the data, all the devices, all the application being outside of their organization all of a sudden, and they had to keep everything secure, compliant, and of course, keep all the employees productive. So we did a research recently. We do it every 6 months with the security leaders. And the research just was about what are the top of mind and challenges for the CISO and security specialists this year. And the top 5 came as not really surprising. The first one was ransomware and the risk of the ransomware and how they're going to really deal with that. The second one was, now that their acceleration to the cloud and migration to a digital state got accelerated, how are they going to make sure the security of the resources and the configuration of all the application and workloads, etc., in the cloud is being done appropriately? The third one was, how are they going to make sure their hybrid multi-cloud environment is secure? Fourth one, how they're going to stay both secure and how they're going to keep their employees productive. And finally, the last one, which is not a surprise to anybody, and we've been dealing with it for a few years, was how are they going to really deal with the talent shortage in both security and cloud industries? So I know Zero Trust is a very overused word, and you probably hear it over and over again. But if we think about it, it brings us back to the basics and the hygiene of what everybody needs to be doing. But you will be surprised to see a lot of organizations are still not really doing the basics. So if you think about Zero Trust, the main principles are basics. The first one is how important the identity is, right? So our CISO always says, the hackers, they don't break in, they log in. So it's very important to really pay attention to your identity. Make sure your front door is protected. Use multi-factor authentication, use conditional access, and all the information available to you to automate the enforcement of multi-factor authentication and allowing someone into your environment. The second one is use the least privilege access, right? And just in time, just enough access. Use the risk-based adaptive policies to protect yourself. And then the last one is really assume breach. design with the assumption that your users, the data, devices, application, network, and infrastructure, all of them can be breached. And how can we come back to normal activities as quickly as possible and detect and respond as quickly as possible. And I just want to say something on the last point on the shortage of the talent and what can we do about it. So for us, we really need to start investing in our people. So if you think about the fact that every person can be a defender, if they have the passion, if they get the right education and training, they can be on our side and they can help us defend our countries, our society, and our world. And also, if we really start hiring more diverse candidates, because the security and the challenges we need to address for security, they're so diverse and so complex. And we need also diverse candidates in order to address those issues. And when I talk about diversity, yes, I'm talking about gender diversity, race diversity, but also different backgrounds, different education, different culture, different upbringing. And all of those can really help us address this challenge that we are all facing. So thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for attending Black Hat. And I know you're all looking forward to this very exciting panel. Enjoy the session. And I'll be in our booth if you need to have a chat afterwards. Thank you so much, Jeff.
Thank you. Yes, clap, clap. All right. So with that, it's my pleasure now to introduce Black Hat Review Board members. I want to start all the way on my right, your left, with Stefano Zanero, Associate Professor, Dipartimento di Elettronica, Informazione e Politico di Milano.
We specifically put that.
Yeah, that was a trick. That was a honeypot trip for me. All right, and then to Stefano's left is Vandana, Security Relations Leader at SNAC. I love saying that word. I'm going to say it again. And then next to me is Lidia Giuliano, Security Advisor and Consultant at an undisclosed financial services company. It's up to you to discover. And then finally, Ryan Flores, Senior Manager, Threat Research at Trend Micro. So here we go. Let's kick this thing off. I'm going to start with, everybody has seen the meme and the jokes about what was the motivator in your company's IT acceleration? Was it governance? Was it this? Was it the CIO, the CTO, or was it COVID-19? Right. COVID-19 was the thing that, right. So quickly just give us a quick glimpse from your perspective. What did COVID-19 actually accelerate? Or if it was going to be an inevitable 5 years to get there, we got there in 1 year. Like what can we attribute to COVID-19? I mean, it's obvious, like people now use Microsoft Teams, right? People use Zoom. People use these things they weren't really using before. Even though we had Skype and we had other platforms, that just they weren't used until the imperative of COVID-19. Anything? What happened? What did COVID-19 force you to do?
I can start. So Trend Micro is a vendor, so I can provide a vendor what do you call this, perspective on this. We actually grew at, our sales for cloud security products grew during the pandemic, and that's because a lot of the automation, integration projects were pushed way ahead.
So everybody that was doing cloud just did more of it faster.
Yes, because a lot of their platforms, a lot of their projects needs to be rolled out immediately to support the business during the pandemic.
Right, because nobody's going up in the office or doing it remote, so you better get your cloud working.
Yes.
So that was just a huge acceleration.
Yes.
Okay, so we can say cloud adoption accelerated. Mm-hmm. Anything?
We teach to 39,000 students, and we were starting our semester 3 days later than the first case was discovered in Italy. How do you think my life changed?
Welcome, virtual teacher.
Yeah. So we deployed 900 classes on Teams in a week. But Polytechnic had never taught anything online. Never. Right. Anything,
so it forced a university to go from zero to online in a week.
And fortunately not from zero, in the sense that I mean, Office 365 was already deployed to students, to professors, so it was already there. At the very least, the basic infrastructure. But for other universities, yes, from zero to...
But I mean, culturally, the university is not ready to...
Culturally, we are not there yet. It's very hard for speakers. I see some speakers here in the room. They can tell probably, but for speakers, for listeners, and for professors and students to adapt to a different medium. The medium is part of the way you convey the message. So
this, for me, it was like the virtual distance learning conferences, all of that. It was kind of pie in the sky, and then it had to get concrete like really quickly.
But also for the community, I think, you said before, there's a group of people discussing information security, which one tells us you're old because it's cybersecurity now. And two, these type of occasions did not happen for a couple of years. And while we all are used to communicate also electronically, the value of seeing and meeting peers face to face and brainstorm and discuss was not there for a couple of years. And I don't think it was really substituted by the electronic means.
Yeah. COVID-19, anything?
Okay.
Yeah.
Go for it.
It was really interesting because when COVID hit, a lot of the branches shut down.
Branches at the unknown
Absolutely.
financial
Absolutely. Absolutely. And banks were obviously struggling. People still needed to get loans, whether it was a business loan or a home loan or a personal loan or whatever. And with the branches closed, how are people going to send their documents in, you know, for people that would traditionally walk
Oh, they
up
just use the fax.
Well, they could. So
Fax.
So a lot of the things that we were seeing was those really fast spin-ups of those cloud solutions so that people could adopt online really quickly. And then with the cloud enablement program, you've gone from, hey, we've got these great AMIs that we're just going to use the default out of the box. We better make it some sort of SOE build. So just spinning up things a lot faster than what you would normally expect.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, while we were talking about online learning, online tuitions, I completed my degree, my second master's, cyber law, during this pandemic. It motivated me to do because I could spend some time and go ahead and learn something new. So it was a time when a lot of people lost jobs, but at the same time, after some time, like after a few months, yeah, we had so many new jobs coming up because a lot of breaches happened. While we talk about adoption, we just wanted to go with the lightning speed. The most important thing was we were losing on the smallest of items. Think about security misconfigurations. A lot of issues came up. Broken authorization, broken authentication, anything that you can think of just was there. Because we wanted to run the business at that time. Because nobody anticipated that the whole world would shut down. Nobody anticipated that we would be working remotely. I never anticipated that for 2.5 years we would be working remotely, and after 3 years we're going to be meeting in person. So a lot of changes we saw. And now it motivated us to think about how we can be adversary ready in any situation. Right. Thinking about cloud security to application security to network security, covering everything. And then we just saw about zero trust. It became the buzzword, right, even if it's been there for a very long time. So everybody said, we have zero trust.
Okay. Okay, so what I'm hearing though is speed. Everything got stress tested, right? Maybe you had some remote workers, now you have 100% remote. Okay, great. I learned a lot during COVID-19. I got to test a lot of products, but now we've got Russia invading Ukraine. So if things were accelerated with COVID-19 and all the things that enabled us to do, now think about what is Russia invading Ukraine. It's like everything's accelerated again. Can it get accelerated any faster? But now it seems to be not exercising our remote work or our cloud, it's exercising more like compliance or sanctions, or you're not doing business there anymore, or data localization, you can't store that data. So think about everything we just went through with COVID. What's going to happen? What are the fallout? What are these second order effects that we're not fully appreciating yet around Russia, right? And I've got a couple thoughts around this, but I want to, before I jump in.
So I think that the first thing that this showed us is that Thomas Reed's book from 10 years ago, Cyber War Will Not Take Place, was prophetic. It was not. It was very well taught, which is a different thing, but it sounded prophetic. Because in the end, as you were citing all of the impacts, none of them was related with cyber attacks. They were all related with relocation of business, shutting down things, controlling what's going on. Yeah. All things that are cybersecurity related, but not the things that you would maybe instinctively have associated with a conflict starting.
Right, like there's not a Russian special forces team parachuting in to reconfigure the routers.
Exactly.
Right, I mean, they're not shooting the digital bullets from the digital high ground with the kill chain to affect McDonald's deciding whether or not they're doing business in Moscow, right? They seem disconnected.
And also, there is this interesting effect that we already have a huge information flow problem throughout this industry, which we always informally solved. So Ryan, you can kind of pretend you're not here,
yes,
but
you're hinting and gesturing.
Antivirus companies exchanging things beyond company policy with each other because that's the way you get things fixed. Right. Or security,
the informal information sharing network.
The informal exchange. And now COVID has made the informal exchange difficult first, and this is going to make it almost impossible for certain people to do. And that's going to impact us, all of us, not just like us, but all of us.
Yeah. Do you have a thought?
I do. It was interesting when the sanctions started. We saw a lot of teams scramble, especially around the IBAN networks, just trying to get everything settled and all in place. But I think the spin-off of that was, well, what are our SaaS partners doing, and do we need to impose the same sort of controls?
You could be counting on a SaaS partner, and they could be like, "No, we interpret the rules differently than you. Sorry."
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. And then do you follow the policies of whatever the sector that you're following, or do we? Hey, let's just do block by geolocation, and what does that look like? Because we know that can all be circumvented. So it was very interesting, but it's very ambulance chasing, like it's quick, let's all do this, and then you don't hear anything about it again.
Yeah. One of the things I find most interesting about this era, the Russia, that's not the COVID era, is this, what I talked about a little bit earlier, the super empowered individuals. And I don't know, in the audience, it may be not very popular in this area, but there's a book written by Neil Stephenson. It was very fundamental in my formative years, A Snow Crash. And in the book Snow Crash, there's this one individual that has a hardwired to his heart monitor a nuclear bomb. And he's got the nuclear bomb tied to his, I think it's in his motorcycle or something. But the point of the whole character with the bomb is that he's a sovereign individual, and he's his own nation. And he travels around in other countries because he's super empowered because he's got this bomb wired to him. So people kind of let him do what he wants to do. In this era, we have super empowered companies. And so, I mean, Microsoft is releasing fantastic intelligence reports about the network traffic they're seeing in Russia. But they can do that because they're getting telemetry from all of their operating systems, right? They are super empowered. They can see things nobody else can see. And they're deciding to take that super empowerment and to publish reports to everybody's transparency benefit. Like, Microsoft doesn't have anything really too much to publish around COVID-19, but come to a cyber war in Europe, they do. Same thing, a lot of individuals have a lot of power. Your employees have a lot of discretionary power to decide. That is a new thing that has not existed before. I mean, you could joke Paul Vixie when he was managing ISE and controlled, I think, Bind, and Bind was like 85% of the world's DNS resolvers. You could joke that Paul Vixie controlled 80% of the world's internet name resolution. Not anymore, but there were very few people with that kind of power. Now, I'm really fascinated that we're entering this ability of where civil society, the Microsofts, the Apples, the we have the power, and individuals like MongoDB are deciding whether or not Russia gets to be on the internet. That's super scary, but it's super empowering. I mean, how do you approach that mentally? Because that is quite different than how we were approaching this a year ago.
Well, everything that's old is new again, because I think you remember, and I remember years where there were hacking groups that decided which nation was on the internet or not at certain hours of the day. But it was a different internet. It was not that critical to society. So I really think that what you are saying makes a lot of sense. And in addition, all of these, all of the governance or lack of governance that underlies the internet was basically predicated on a cooperating word. Yes, well, there were conflicts, where there were attritions, but not really like Cold War era style big conflicts. How does that self-governance work?
How does that work now, right?
Right.
There's a crisis of, right, in internet governance right now.
That's precisely what I was talking about, and I don't want to enter things that you may not be able to discuss that much, but that's a very interesting thought for right now, because it's an emergency, but also for the foreseeable future. Which goes
that's
hand in hand
interesting,
with
right? What's the legitimacy of these governance models, right? I guess that's right. That's the stress test right now.
And that's where influence
Grab his
lies.
microphone.
Yeah, sure. And that's where the influence lies. The way you said, all these organizations, when they have the power to decide whether to run the business there or not, because of the situations which are happening, makes a lot of difference. They can decide where the industry can go, how things can change, and if someone is doing not the right thing, how to stop them and where to stop them. And that's how governance can be strategized. And it's not just in the hand of government, but now in the organizations as well. And they supporting their people that yes, this is the right thing to do.
We saw that with the elections as well, with Twitter as well. It's not much different.
Right. Twitter exercising their moderation.
So I think like one of the things that I noticed, like we were writing a report on cyber attacks happening, in conjunction with the Ukraine and Russia crisis. And then we were thinking how to properly call it. I mean, of course, we cannot call it special military action, right? Because if we use that term,
You're
are
aligning
actually,
yourself with Russia's perspective.
Yes. So even how you call a certain situation matters and reflects on what the company's position is on that particular matter.
And your employees, if you have a lot of employees in Ukraine and none in Russia, it's different for your company than if it's the other way around. They're all in Russia. And so
exactly.
Your employees might have a completely different idea than your company.
Yes, exactly. And if I might just add, it's not just us, governments, private companies who are having this problem. A ransomware group, Conti, they had the Conti leaks, and that was in part triggered when some of the Russian group members said that they are supporting Russia. And then, other people got pissed on that and then had the leak. Right. So even cyber criminal organizations are affected on
So I guess cyber criminal governance is also having a crisis of legitimacy.
Right.
Let's see. Speed. Talk about speed for just a second. So years ago, I would go to these meetings. I was lucky enough to go to a couple of these Cisco meetings, and they'd have all these top CEOs from the world's biggest 50 companies, and you'd listen to what their concerns are. And every time you went, the number one concern wasn't regulation, it wasn't pricing competition or anything, it was speed. They always cared, how can I go faster? How can I reconfigure reconfigure my network? How can I adapt to the new market? Speed, speed, speed. If you said the word speed out loud 3 times, you won a business contract. So here we are. COVID accelerated everything again. So the people pushing for speed were probably right. They had an advantage. Do they have an advantage now in Russia? Probably too, right? They can move the networks away from Russia or Ukraine or European, right? Does speed always win? Is that the thing we've been overlooking? Should we be in the speed business, right? You know, does security have a relationship with speed? If we're the anchor, right, and speed wins, we're in a losing position. And so the way I try to deal with this is I say, no, security is like giant brakes on a race car. And you put those giant brakes on the race car so the race car can go faster. If security can provide the reliability or some sort of confidence for the company to go faster because it can manage the risks better, then the company can move faster than the competitors and have the same or less risks. I would love to hear.
So first of all, for any drug enforcement agency in attendance, is meaning speed as distance over time. That's important. In particular, when he said in the business of speed, that's what he meant. That's important. So first of all. Second, I think that, well, it's, you know, in the branch of everything that's old is new again, it's not like you couldn't read about the advantages of speed in Sun Tzu or in any of the ancient texts and strategies. So it's not new. Being
But it's not an ends to a mean. It's not like now I'm a little bit faster so I make more money. Not necessarily.
No,
so.
I'm more, maybe more than fast. What we mean is agile in reconfiguring, in adapting. Right. Okay. And agile in adapting is also on an evolutionary scale something that
maybe
actually
it means it's keeping your
sense.
teams fresh.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's definitely an advantage. And the other thing is that suddenly being the larger and more worldwide you are, the more exposed you are, which used to be pretty much the other way. A company that was large enough would be able to sustain impacts in any or specific areas. Right now, worldwide tensions, the larger you are constantly
the more
impacted.
attack surface you might have.
Yes,
right.
That's an attack surface as well.
Yeah, any
I'll
thoughts?
jump in. Speed, the need for speed. It's funny, I agree with Stefano to a degree. It is a little bit old is new again. I remember 20 years ago, a long time ago when I started in security, actually no, I was a developer. And we would do these distributed make files, we would automate everything, we would have security patterns in our code, and that was a way to automate security and test that there weren't any vulnerabilities in the code. It's all new again. Right. And at least I know in my role, we've got dedicated security people that are part of the team. We're not no people. I'm not going to say you can't do this. It's how do we make it, how do you make the solution so that it's usable for your customers, but also secure as well?
Yeah, there's this Tony Sager, who was for years at the National Security Agency. He ran the protection side, and he used to always say that you can't go. The United States can't go one-on-one with its adversaries. There's too many people, right? You can't go. So you have to automate. So you have to spend a lot of time figuring out what you can automate so you can reserve the humans for the highest value use, right? Not slogging through log files. They have to do the high value things that humans can do. So you have to spend a lot of time and money doing that. And then at the end, you have to automate everything else. It's like that seems to be your path. And so if you were in the speed game and you were automating or you were picking products or you're picking technologies, languages to develop in, how does that speed or security drive what you buy, what vendors you pick, what operating systems you run? Like, are there certain winners that we just know are going to, that's the way. Of course, everybody does that.
I don't like picking vendors because it's not about picking vendor products. It's about understanding what your business requirements are, understanding what the end goal is. So if we talk about just whether you're trying to create like a secure SOE or you're trying to create some sort of infrastructure as code. It's all automated. You shouldn't be looking at vendors, or you shouldn't be looking at particular products. Or even if you've got an enterprise-wide solution, you might be working with a dev that enterprise solution doesn't suit them, so you need to go for a bespoke. But it's more important that it can scan these pieces of code, or it can scan these types of things. So it's about understanding what the end goal is.
Is it about simplification? Like, things have gotten so hyper complicated, if you simplify your attack surface, you might not have every feature, but maybe it's easier for your team to manage?
Absolutely.
You think so?
Yeah.
Simplification might be something to pay attention to.
Yeah, because I mean, if you've got one enterprise solution, say for example like check marks, and I'm not picking on that at all, it may not integrate with an IDE or or Git or GitLabs or something like that. It may not work, so they might find that Sonar Q might be better or something like that. But the point is that you're still doing the same checks and balances. It just might be a different fit because the language is different or something like that.
It is like you have multiple doors in your house, multiple windows, but when you leave out, you make sure you close everything. And the most important thing is that you getting to know what you want and what you have, because a lot of times people tend to buy every vendor that they see. Oh, they go in a rat race. Oh, this is one people are using. Oh, my competitor is using.
I think you could probably spend every dollar in your budget doing that, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So when you do that, then you tend to lose on what you really need. Because if you don't know what you need, you will keep buying the products and it is never going to serve the purpose. And when you talk about speed, to attain that right speed, you need to know everything about you first and then go with the full speed that yes, breaches will happen, failures will happen, but then how you come back from that failure is the most important aspect.
Okay, so we've got about 10 minutes left. I'm going to do a throwback to a question we had years ago in Black Hat in Europe, in the UK, and then we're going to open it up for any questions if you want us to talk about any questions you may have. So the question is around deception. How many of you remember when everything was about deception networks? And I remember Gadi, Gadi Evron, right? So Gadi Evron gets on and he helps pioneer the deception marketplace. And he starts off and I'm talking to him and he's like, there's 3 deception vendors right now. We're one of them. And in 6 months, we guess there'll be 20. And it went to like 50 or something. And then the market collapsed again, right? And so now we're not talking about deception anymore, really. We're talking about canary. Tiny finger of what deception could promise, but we're all buying the one little finger. We're not buying the full featured, right? So just like everything else that had a lot of promise and then it failed, what went wrong? Why aren't we trapping everybody in a hall of mirrors?
So I'll make a couple of observations from someone who conspicuously does not buy products because I'm a university professor. But the first observation is you can still say Europe when you refer to the UK. That's fine.
But no, they're not
fine.
really.
Okay.
It's okay. It's more of an aspirational thing at this point between the UK and Europe. Yeah.
The second thing is, I think that what has happened. You mentioned deception, and that's fine. But we could mention any other number of technologies. And so I will respond with an observation that one of our also board members, but Black Hat speakers, Eric Evanchik, once made while we were walking around in the humongous vendor hall of RSA. And it was like, okay, so we walked through this, and I counted in my head what these people were selling. And it's like these 5 things. If you count right, it's like
you could
4 or 5
reduce them
things.
down to 5 things.
Yeah, and in fact, those are the 4 or 5 things. I mean, it's probably more than 5, but it's still a very limited amount of classes of things that a security product can do for you. Because, and this is the hidden, not so hidden, because we all know probably, but the unspoken secret is that there's only so much that you can put in a product. Most of what security people do is in here. And that's part of the process that you were saying before, trying to automate, but at the same time, there's a lot of things that can't we can't really automate. Either we can't right now or we can't at all. That's the discussion.
Try to automate a business process decision.
Right.
Yeah.
Or try to automate threat modeling. And like 90% of my discussions on security are reduced to someone failed at threat modeling. So Adam Shostak, this is for you. So, this is something that you cannot really automate. You can support, but not automate. And there's a lot of security decisions that you cannot really automate.
So deception just fell into that. Or was it more like, well, okay, we've got them in the Hall of Mirrors now?
It was not in the 5, and so it kind of fell out.
It wasn't in the 5, so it fell, right. It wasn't a core need.
Right, so.
Yeah, I think deception technology has its place. For example, if you're an intelligence agency or a high-profile government agency, but if you're not even a Fortune 500 company,
like what are you doing with it?
Yeah, what are you doing with it? Yeah. So I think there's also a limited market for it, and that's why the Canary, which is a smaller version of it, would have its place on most corporates. Right. But I think there's also this buzzword thing that goes on every couple of years, wherein Gartner's analyst needs to have that new shiny word to talk about. And a lot of vendors, ourselves included sometimes, would latch on into this and just say, behavior monitoring, oh, that's the buzzword right now. Okay, we have some feature that looks like that. We'll call it like that.
We'll call it the fileless zero canary.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. So now let's go to the audience. Anybody have any questions? If not, I'll just keep running the microphone here. Anybody want to hear us riff on any topics in particular? We'll get you a microphone. If not, okay, we got one question back here. If you could just say your name and what company or where you're coming from.
Hi, my name's Justin. I'm from Toyota Financial Services. I was interested in your earlier comments about the, I can't remember what you phrased them as, the hyper-influential companies or something along those lines. These companies that now have...
The hyper-empowered or
hyper-empowered, yeah. It's kind of and you mentioned sort of cyberpunk books and things like that. It kind of reminds me of that cyberpunk William Gibson-esque future where companies control things rather than governments. And it does bring up, does it not, concerns around what does that look like? Where does that slippery slope end up? Obviously the very controversial purchase of Twitter by Elon Musk, which is going on at the moment. What does that mean in terms of him reversing some of those policies you spoke about for Twitter? And it's not like a service you can just turn off these days. I mean, they sort of treat themselves as the public square for discourse in most of the Western democracies, certainly. If they now reverse their decision and decide, well, they don't like what Microsoft has to say because they're a competitor, they're going to now start tuning them out of that conversation or something along those lines. Or a government in a non-fascist regime or something like, not Russia, not China, but they decide they don't like what Boris Johnson has to say anymore. Then they're going to start tuning him out of UK politics. I'd like to hear your thoughts sort of on that part of that slippery slope sort of argument of what that future may look like.
So I have one thought, and I'll hand it off to everybody, and that's, it seems like it's a facet of the same kind of crisis of confidence that Stefano was talking about. I'll look at it from a different perspective. I came from the chief security officer at ICANN, and when I was at ICANN, everything was about trying to keep an open and interoperable internet. So you had to try to please all the people all the time. And you could see certain players trying to segment the internet or put in alternative root servers, or you could tell that certain players were trying to, but you had to go for this kind of open interoperable internet. And the engineers, the people building the internet standards, IETF, they would make decisions to create a more secure internet. So for example, we would go with secure BGP. Okay, BGP routing is more secure now, but it's also more brittle. It's more fragile. Okay, well, people are hijacking our ASN numbers. Okay, we're going to do RPKI. Okay, now it's more fragile, but it's more secure, but it's more rigid. And okay, now we're doing DNSSEC because DNSSEC spoofing is a problem. Okay, but now it's more fragile and more brittle. And this keeps repeating. We're not doing what is it, ICMP redirects. We're not doing, a lot of protocols have been locked down, but they were done by the engineers trying to build a more secure internet. And they are not the politicians, and they're not the private sector. And what's happening, I think, is we're going to wake up one day in the private sector, the regulators are going to say, how come there's one organization that can shut down routing for the internet? That's not how we intended that to happen. But the engineers are going to be like, well, shit, nobody asked us. We're just trying to make a better technology. And that's what I fear is going to happen, is that if the engineering class that's developing these technologies are not getting information for their threat model, they're just going to be making the decisions purely on a technical basis. They're not making it on the basis of a political Twitter impact to society, or a Russian interference, or regulation, competition, power of competition in the European Union. That's going to be a big problem for us. And this sanctions conversation we talked about briefly, it's a crisis where you see some standards bodies say, we thought about this and we decided as engineers that it's not our problem. Oh, well, it's going to be your problem if you don't accept it. And so I'd love to hear other people's thoughts.
Well, for one, I'm not referring to anyone specifically, but someone buying a social media company so that they can run pump and dump schemes freely and destroying Western democracies in the process is the most cyberpunk thing I've ever heard of. So thanks for the question. And the thing that you described is absolutely what we were talking about before about governance, right? The internet governance is kind of a technocratic, detached from the real world of politics process. And that's why it has worked so far.
Right, it's because it hasn't touched reality.
It has brought us this far, but now we are intersecting with reality, and clashes are going to occur. You mentioned one, I will mention another. What happens if, and they're going to do this over mine and a conspicuous number of other dead bodies, but they are going to do this, the European Commission decides that scanning private messages is so important that it needs to be guaranteed, end-to-end encryption be damned. And that
puts the government in the middle of every conversation.
That kind of does, right? And we are going to try and explain it to them, but given our rate of success in explaining to them the implications of Wassenaar and explaining to them the implication of the Digital Services Directive and Copyright Directive, I'm not very hopeful that we are going to be able to explain this. So, but we as engineers, we can look at that and say, which is what we have done for a number of years. Well, this does not make sense. This is never going to happen. So you can write it into law, but it's not going to happen. Well, guess what?
They still write it into law.
They're still writing it into law. And so one way or another, that's going to impact us. So we would better start talking to these people, or actually, as you did, try to help in service to
the biggest
to
phrase we've got is like, you don't collect it if you can't protect it. That sort of mentality.
Right.
Like, and I always think engineers, being engineers, are going to engineer themselves out of the problem. And if you look at what Apple tried to do, they just said, well, we don't have the data because we end-to-end encrypted it and we don't have the key and it's not our problem and we don't need 5,000 lawyers.
And we are going to court in order to make sure that it doesn't become our problem.
Right. Our business model is not to hire 5,000 lawyers to answer law enforcement requests. We don't have the data. But if companies don't start engineering their products, engineering themselves out of the problem, you're going to be in the middle of every single one of these debates, right? If Twitter, you're just in the middle of it all. How does an undisclosed financial corporation feel about being in the middle of it all? You don't want to, right? You want to provide financial services. Okay, any other questions? We'll take one more question. Come on. I like the cyberpunk questions. Oh, yeah. Just give him
Hello, I'm Lava from Dog Security. And my question is related to the sanctions on Russia, because it was not just on the Russian government. A lot of utilitarian services were cut off for the Russian people, right? So how do you think countries will now do threat modeling going forward about even reliance on services from potentially, they would be friendly countries today, right, which is largely Western countries, but could turn different tomorrow, which could affect even functioning of the countries, right? So just threat modeling at a country level, going based on what has happened with Russia.
I'll refer to the European citizen. Look, go European.
I don't know. So the point is actually excellent, and what I think is happening is that there was a memo that was circulated and widely mistranslated from the Russian government, basically saying to their service providers, look, you should plan for being cut off from the internet, because at some point other countries are going to use that as one of the sanctions. It hasn't really happened that much, but it goes in that direction. And I think that on the one hand, there is basically no way at the moment that a country can really plan for that or be resilient to that. And on the other hand, we never engineered the internet governance so that doing this would be really impossible. And maybe that was a mistake.
All right. With those deep thoughts, we are bringing to a close the Locknote session. Black Hat. All right, thank you, everyone. We'll be around. We can answer questions. We're going to go to the reception across the hall. And with that, thank you very much. See you tomorrow.